The next blow fell far from King's Landing, in the Vale of Arryn, when Sir Corwin Corbray ruled that Lady Jeyne's will must prevail and declared Sir Joffrey Arryn the rightful lord of the Eyrie. When the other claimants proved intransigent and refused to accept his ruling, Sir Corwin imprisoned the Gilded Falcon and his sons and executed Eldrick Arryn, yet somehow Sir Eldrick's mad father, Sir Arnold, eluded him and fled to Runestone, where he had served as a squire in his boyhood. Gunthor Royce, known in the Vale as the Bronze Giant, was an old man, as stubborn as he was fearless. When Sir Corwin arrived to winkle Sir Arnold out of his sanctuary, Lord Gunthor donned his ancient bronze armor and rode out to confront him. Words grew heated, turned to curses, then to threats. When Corbray drew on Lady Forlorn whether to strike at Royce or merely threaten him will never be known. A crossbowman on Runestone's battlements loosed a quarrel and pierced him through the breast. Striking down one of the king's regents was an act of treason, akin to attacking the king himself. Moreover, Sir Corwin had been uncle to Quentyn Corbray, the powerful and martial Lord of Heart's Home, as well as the beloved husband to Lady Rhaena the Dragonrider, good brother to her twin, Lady Baela, and thus by marriage kin to Alan Oakenfist. With his death, the flames of war sprang up anew across the Vale of Arryn. The Corbrays, Hunters, Cranes, and Redforts rallied in support of Lady Jeyne's chosen heir, Sir Joffrey Arryn, whilst the Royces of Runestone and Sir Arnold, the Mad Heir, were joined by the Templetons, Tollets, Coldwaters, and Duddons, along with the Lords of the Fingers and Three Sisters. Gulltown and House Grafton remained staunch in its support of the Gilded Falcon, despite his captivity. The answer from King's Landing was not long in coming. Lord Rowan sent one last flight of ravens to the Vale, commanding those lords supporting the Mad Heir and Gilded Falcon to lay down their arms at once, lest they provoke the Iron Throne's displeasure. When no reply was forthcoming, the Hand took counsel with Oakenfist and made plans to bring the rebellion to an end by force. With the coming of spring, it was thought that the high road through the mountains of the moon would once again be passable. 5,000 men set out up the King's Road, under the command of Sir Robert Rowan, Lord Thaddeus's eldest son. Levies from Maidenpool, Derry, and Hayford swelled their numbers on the march, and once across the Trident they were joined by 600 Freys and 1,000 Blackwoods under Lord Benjicot himself, making them 9,000 strong. Entering the mountains, a second attack was launched by sea. Rather than make use of the royal fleet commanded by Sir Gedmund Peake the Great Axe, his predecessor's uncle, the Hand turned to House Valerion for the required ships. Oakenfist would command the fleet himself, whilst his wife, Lady Baela, went to Dragonstone to comfort her widowed twin, and incidentally make certain that Lady Rhaena did not attempt to avenge her husband's death herself on mourning. The army Lord Alan was to carry to the Vale would be commanded by Lady Lara's brother Morado Rogaire, Lord Rowan announced. That Lord Morado was a fearsome fighter, none could doubt. Tall and stern, with white blonde hair and blazing blue eyes, he looked the very image of a warrior of old Valyria, men said, and bore a longsword of Valyrian steel he called truth. His prowess notwithstanding, however, the Lysene's appointment was deeply unpopular. Whilst his brothers, Rogerio and Lotho, were both fluent in the common tongue, Morado's grasp of the language was limited at best, and the wisdom of putting a Lysene in command of an army of Westerosi knights was widely questioned. Lord Rowan's enemies at court, amongst them many of the men who owed their offices to Onwin Peake, were quick to say that this was proof of what they had been whispering for half a year, that Thaddeus Rowan had sold himself to Oakenfist and the Rogers. Such muttering might not have mattered had the assaults upon the Vale been successful. They were not. Though Oakenfist easily swept aside the Gilded Falcon's sails to capture the harbor at Gulltown, the attackers lost hundreds of men taking the port walls by storm, and thrice as many during the house-to-house fighting that followed. After his translator was slain during the battle in the streets, Morado Rogaire had great difficulty communicating with his own troops. The men did not understand his commands, and he did not understand their reports. Chaos ensued. At the other end of the Vale, meanwhile, the high road through the mountains proved far less open than had been assumed. Sir Robert Rowan's host found itself struggling through deep snows in the higher passes, slowing their advance to a crawl, and time again their baggage train came under attack by the savages native to those mountains, descendants of the first men driven from the Vale by the Andals thousands of years before. They were skeletons in skins, armed with stone axes and wooden clubs, Ben Blackwood said later, but so hungry and so desperate that they could not be deterred, no matter how many we killed. Soon the cold and the snow and the nightly attacks began to take a toll. High in the mountains, the unthinkable happened one night as Lord Robert and his men huddled about their campfires. In the slopes above, a cave mouth was visible from the road, and a dozen men climbed up to see if it might offer them shelter from the wind. The bones scattered about the mouth of the cave might have given them pause, yet they pressed on. And roused a dragon. 16 men perished in the fight that followed, and 60 more suffered burns before the angry brown Wyrm took wing and fled deeper into the mountains with a ragged woman clinging to its back. That was the last known sighting of Sheepstealer and his rider, Nettles, recorded in the annals of Westeros, though the wildlings of the mountains still tell tales of a fire witch who once dwelled in a hidden vale far from any road or village. One of the most savage of the mountain clan came to worship her. The storytellers say, youths would prove their courage by bringing gifts to her, and were only accounted men when they returned with burns to show that they had faced the dragon woman in her lair. Their encounter with the dragon was not the last peril encountered by Sir Robert's host. By the time they reached the Bloody Gate, a third of them had perished in a wildling attack or died from cold or hunger. Amongst the dead was Sir Robert Rowan, crushed by a falling boulder when the clansmen toppled half a mountainside down upon the column. Bloody Ben Blackwood assumed command upon his death. Though still a half-year shy of manhood, Lord Blackwood by this time had as much experience of war as men 4 times his age. At the Bloody Gate, the entrance to the Vale, the survivors found food, warmth, and welcome. But Sir Joffrey Arryn, the Knight of the Bloody Gate and Lady Jane Arryn's chosen successor, saw at once that the crossing had left Blackwood's men unfit for battle. Far from being a help to him in his war, they would be a burden. Even as the fighting in the Vale of Arryn continued, the promise of the Lysene Spring suffered another grievous blow hundreds of leagues to the south, with the near-simultaneous demise of Lysandro the Magnificent in Lee and his brother Drazenko in Sunspear. Though the narrow sea lay between them, the 2 Rogers died within a day of each other, both under suspicious circumstances. Drazenko perished first, choking to death upon a piece of bacon. Lysandro drowned when his opulent barge sank whilst carrying him from his perfumed garden back to his palace. Though a few would insist that their deaths were unfortunate accidents, many more took the manner and timing of their passings as proof of a plot to bring down House Rogaire. The faceless men of Braavos were widely believed to have been responsible for the killings. No more subtle assassins were known to exist anywhere in the wide world. But if indeed the faceless men had done these deeds, at whose bidding had they acted? The Iron Bank of Braavos was suspected, as was the Archon of Tirosh, Raclio Rindun, and various merchant princes and magisters of Lee known to have chafed under the velvet tyranny of Lysandro the Magnificent. Some went so far as to suggest that the first magister had been removed by his own sons. He had sired 6 trueborn sons, 3 daughters, and 16 bastards. So skillfully had the brothers been removed, however, that not even the fact of murder could be proved. None of the offices through which Lysandro exercised his dominion over Lee were hereditary. His crab-eaten corpse had scarce been dredged up from the sea before his old enemies, false friends, and erstwhile allies began the struggle to succeed him. Amongst the Lysene, it is truly said, wars are fought with plots and poisons rather than with armies. For the rest of that bloody year, the magisters and merchant princes of Lee performed a deadly dance, rising and falling almost fortnightly. Oft as not their falls were fatal. Torre O'Hain was poisoned with his wife, his mistress, his daughters, one being the maid whose wisp of a gown had caused such scandal at the Maiden's Day ball, siblings, and supporters at the feast he held to celebrate his elevation to first magister. Silverio Pendares was stabbed through the eye leaving the Temple of Trade, whilst his brother Perino was garroted in a pillow house as a slave girl pleasured him with her mouth. The Gonfalonier Moreo de Garin was slain by his own elite guards, and Matino Orthes, a fervent worshipper of the goddess Pantera, was mauled and partly devoured by his prized shadowcat when its cage was unaccountably left open one night. Though Lysandro's children could not inherit his offices, his palace went to his daughter Lysara, his ships to his son Draco, his pillow house to his son Fredo, his library to his daughter Mara. All of his offspring partook of the wealth represented by the Rogaire Bank. Even his bastards received shares, albeit fewer than those allotted to his trueborn sons and daughters. Effective control of the bank, however, was vested in Lysandro's eldest son, Lysaro, of whom it was truly written, he had twice his father's ambition and half his father's ability. Lysaro Rogaire aspired to rule Lee, but had neither the cunning nor the patience to spend decades in the slow accumulation of wealth and power, as his father Lysandro had. With rivals dying all around him, Lysaro first moved to secure his own person by buying 1,000 unsullied from the slavers of Astapor. These eunuch warriors were renowned as the finest foot soldiers in the world, and were moreover trained to absolute obedience, so their masters need never fear defiance or betrayal. Once surrounded by these protectors, Lysaro secured his selection as Gonfalonier, winning the commons with lavish entertainments and the magisters with bribes larger than any of them had ever seen before. When these expenditures exhausted his personal fortune, he began to divert gold from the bank. His intent, as he later revealed, was to provoke a short, victorious war with Tyrosh or Myr. As Gonfalonier, the glory of conquest would accrue to him, enabling him to win the office of First Magister. By sacking Tyrosh or Myr, he would gain sufficient gold to restore the funds he had taken from the bank and leave him the richest man in Lee. It was a fool's scheme, and it was quickly undone. Legend claims it was men in the hire of the Iron Bank of Bravos who first began suggesting that the Rogaire Bank might be unsound, but regardless of who started it, such talk was soon heard all over Lee. The city's magisters and merchant princes began to demand the return of their deposits, a few at first, then more and more, until a river of gold was pouring from Lysaro's vaults, a river that soon enough ran dry. By the time Lysaro himself was gone, faced with ruin, he fled Lee in the dead of night with 3 bed slaves, 6 servants, and 100 of his unsullied, abandoning his wife, his daughters, and his palace. Understandably alarmed, the city magisters moved at once to seize the Rogaire Bank, only to discover that naught remained but a hollow shell. The fall of House Rogaire was swift and brutal. Lysaro's brothers and sisters claimed to have played no part in the despoiling of the bank, but many doubted their claims of innocence. Draco Rogaire escaped to Volantis on one of his galleys whilst his sister Mara fled to the temple of Indros in man's garb and their claimed sanctuary, but all their siblings were seized and put on trial, even the bastards. When Lysaro Rogaire protested, "I did not know," Magister Tigero Moricos replied, "You should have," and the mob roared its approval. Half the city had been ruined. Nor was the damage confined to Lee. As word of the fall of the House of Rogaire reached Westeros, lords and merchants alike soon realized the coin they had entrusted to the House of Rogaire was lost. In Gulltown, Morado Rogaire moved swiftly, yielding up his command to Alan Oakenfist and taking ship for Bravos. Lotho Rogaire was arrested by Sir Lucas Leagood and his gold cloaks as he attempted to depart King's Landing. All his letters and ledgers were seized, along with every scrap of gold and silver remaining in the vaults atop Visenia's Hill. Meanwhile, Sir Marston Waters of the Kingsguard descended on the Mermaid with 2 of his sworn brothers and 50 guardsmen. The patrons of the brothel were driven into the street, many of them naked. Mushroom was amongst those so rousted, by his own admission, whilst Lord Rogerio was marched at spearpoint through a jeering crowd. At the Red Keep, the brothel keeper and the banker both were imprisoned in the Tower of the Hand. Their kinship to Prince Viserys's wife spared them the horrors of the black cells. For the nonce, at first it was widely assumed that the Hand had ordered their arrest. With Sir Corwin's death in the Vale, only Lord Rowan and Grand Maester Munkin remained as regents. This misapprehension lasted only a few hours, for that very evening Lord Rowan himself joined the Rogers in captivity. Nor did the Fingers, the Hand's supposed protectors, do aught to defend him. When Sir Mervyn Flowers entered the council chambers to take his lordship into custody, Tesserio the Tiger ordered his men to stand aside. The only resistance was that offered by Lord Rowan's squire, who was quickly overwhelmed. "Spare the boy," Lord Thaddeus pleaded, and they did, but not until Flowers had cut off one of the lad's ears, to teach him not to bear steel to the Kingsguard. The list of those to be seized and held for trial as suspected traitors did not end there. 3 of Lord Rowan's cousins and 1 of his nephews were also arrested, along with 20 grooms, servants, and knights retainer in his service. All were taken unawares and yielded meekly. But when Sir Amory Peake approached Maegor's Holdfast with a dozen men at arms, he found Viserys Targaryen himself upon the drawbridge, a battle-axe in hand. It was a heavy axe, the prince a somewhat spindly boy of 3 and 10, the fool Mushroom tells us. One doubted that the lad could even lift that axe, much less wield it. "If you are come to take my lady wife, sir, turn and go," the young prince said, "for you shall not pass whilst I still stand." Sir Amory found his show of defiance more amusing than threatening. "Your lady is wanted for questioning in connection with the treason of her brothers," he told the prince. "And who is it who wants her?" the prince demanded. "The Hand of the king," Sir Amory replied. "Lord Rowan?" asked Viserys. "Lord Rowan has been removed from office. Sir Marston Waters is the new king's hand." At that moment Aegon III himself stepped from the Holdfast gate to stand beside his brother. "I am the king," his grace reminded them, "and I never chose Sir Marston for my hand." Aegon's intervention took Sir Amory aback, Mushroom tells us, but after a moment's hesitation he said, "Your grace is still a boy. Until you come of age, sire, your leal lords must make such choices for you. Sir Marston was chosen by your regents. Lord Rowan is my regent, the king insisted. No longer, said Sir Amory. Lord Rowan betrayed your trust. His regency is at an end. By whose authority? Demanded Aegon. The hand of the king, said the White Knight. Prince Viserys laughed at that, for King Aegon never laughed, to Mushroom's dismay, and said, the hand names the regent and the regent names the hand, and round and round and round we dance, but you shall not pass, sir, nor shall you touch my wife. Begone, or I promise you, every man of you shall die here. Then Sir Amory Peake ran short of patience. He could not allow himself to be balked by two boys, one of 15 and one of 13, the elder unarmed. Enough, he said, and ordered his men to move the boys aside. Be gentle with them, and see that they come to no harm at our hands. This is on your head, sir, Prince Viserys warned. He drove his axe deep into the wood of the drawbridge, scampered back, and said, go no farther than the axe, or you will die. The king took him by the shoulder and drew him back into the safety of the holdfast, and a shadow stepped onto the drawbridge. Sandok the shadow had come from Lee with Lady Lara, a gift from her father the Magister Lysandro. Black of skin and black of hair, he stood almost 7 feet tall. His face, which he oft kept hidden behind a black silk veil, was a mass of thin white scars, and his lips and tongue had been removed, leaving him both mute and hideous to look upon. It was said of him that he had been the victor of 100 fights in the death pits of Meereen, that he had once torn out the throat of a foe with his teeth after his sword had shattered, that he drank the blood of the men he killed, that in the pits he had slain lions, bears, wolves, and wyverns with no weapon but the stones he found upon the sands. Such tales grow in the telling, to be sure, and we cannot know how much of this, if any, is to be believed. Though Sandok could not read or write, Mushroom tells us he was fond of music, and would oft sit in the shadows of Lady Lara's bedchamber playing sweet sad notes on a queer stringed instrument of goldenheart and ebony that stood near as tall as he did. I could sometimes make the lady laugh, though she did not understand more than a few words of our tongue, the fool says, but the shadows playing always made her weep, and strange to say she liked that better. It was a different sort of music that Sandok the shadow played at the gates of Maegor's Holdfast, as Sir Amory's guardsmen rushed at him with sword and spear. That night his chosen instruments were a tall black shield of nightwood, boiled hide, and iron, and a great curved sword with a dragonbone hilt whose dark blade shone in the torchlight with the distinctive ripples of Valyrian steel. His foes howled and cursed and shouted as they came at him, but the shadow made no sound save with his steel, sliding through them silent as a cat, his blade whistling left and right and up and down, drawing blood with every cut, slashing through their mail as if they had been clad in parchment. Mushroom, who claims to have seen the battle from the roof above, testifies that it did not look so much like a swordfight as like a farmer reaping grain. With every stroke more stalks would topple, but these stalks were living men who screamed and cursed as they fell. Sir Amory's men did not lack for courage, and some lived long enough to strike blows of their own, but the shadow, always moving, caught their blades upon his shield, then used that shield to shove them backward, off the bridge onto the hungry iron spikes below. Let this be said of Sir Amory Peake, his dying did not disgrace the Kingsguard. 3 of his men were dead upon the drawbridge and 2 more were twisting on the spikes below by the time Peake slid his own blade from its scabbard. He was clad in white scale armor under his white cloak, Mushroom tells us, but his helm was open-face and he had not brought a shield, and sorely did Sandok make him answer forth these lacks. The shadow made a dance of it, the fool says, betwixt each fresh wound he dealt Sir Amory, he would kill one of his remaining minions before turning back to the White Knight. Yet Peake fought on with stubborn valor, and near the end, for half a heartbeat, the gods gave him his chance when the last of the guards somehow got his hand around Sandok's sword, and ripped it from the shadow's grasp before he went tumbling off the bridge. From his knees, Sir Amory staggered back to his feet and charged his unarmed foe. Sandok tore Viserys's battle-axe from the wood where the prince had buried it and split Sir Amory's head and helm in half from crest to gorget. Leaving the corpse to topple onto the spikes, the shadow paused long enough to shove the dead and dying from the drawbridge before retreating inside Maegor's Holdfast, whereupon the king commanded the bridge to be raised, the portcullis lowered, and the gates barred. The castle within the castle stood secure. And so it would remain for 18 days. The rest of the Red Keep was in the hands of Sir Marston Waters and his Kingsguard, whilst beyond the castle walls Sir Lucas Leagood and his gold cloaks kept a firm grip on King's Landing. Both of them presented themselves before the Holdfast the next morning, to demand that the king leave his sanctuary. Your grace does us wrong to think we mean him harm, Sir Marston said, as the corpses of the men Sandok had slain were brought up from the moat. We acted only to protect your grace from false friends and traitors. Sir Amori was sworn to protect you, to give his own life for yours if need be. He was your leal man, as I am. He did not deserve such a death, at the hands of such a beast. King Aegon was unmoved. Sandok is no beast, he answered from the battlements. He cannot speak, but he hears and he obeys. I commanded Sir Amori to be gone, and he refused. My brother warned him what would happen if he stepped beyond the axe. The vows of the Kingsguard include obedience, I thought. We are sworn to obey the king, sire. This is so, replied Sir Marston, and when you are a man grown, my brothers and I will gladly fall upon our swords should you command that of us. So long as you remain a child, however, we are required by oath to obey the king's hand, for the hand speaks with the king's voice. Lord Thaddeus is my hand, Aegon insisted. Lord Thaddeus sold your realm to Lee and must answer for it. I will serve as your hand until such time as his guilt or innocence can be proved. Sir Marston unsheathed his sword and went to one knee, saying, I swear upon my sword in the sight of gods and men that none shall do you harm whilst I stand beside you. If the Lord Commander believed those words would sway the king, he could not have been more wrong. You stood beside me when the dragon ate my mother, Aegon answered. All you did was watch. I will not have you watch while they kill my brother's wife. Then he left the battlements, and no words of Marston Waters could induce him to return that day, or the next, or the next.